Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to create a mixed media prayer journal. Here is the journal. This is an altered notebook from a dollar bin. Super simple project. Today I'm going to feature these stamps from Yvonne Blair Designs. The Believe stamp, the Never Stop, and the Kneel and French script stamps. As always, these will be linked up in a blog post down below, and I am encouraging you to check with your local retailers as well. So to get started, this is just a dollar bin notebook that I pick these up when they go on clearance, so they're super inexpensive. I have bundles of them in my drawer because I use them quite a bit. I use them to take notes in church, but I also use them for other projects. I want to cover this with this muslin. This is unbleached, and the measurements are sort of irrelevant for this post because you are going to use your book and measure it, so whatever measurement your book happens to be. I just recommend that you do it just a little bit bigger than what your book happens to be. So for supplies, I have a Gelli press. I'm pulling out acrylic paints in whatever colors you like and pull out some of your favorite stencils. I'm using the Tim Holtz stencils, and then I'm also using some cosmetic sponges, a brayer, and whatever stamps I happen to have in my stash. These are from Yvonne Blair. And then I'm also going to just pull out some background die cuts and use those as well. So that's what I'm doing. Now my Gelli press is well loved and I don't always clean it. And that's okay, because as soon as I put this first coat of acrylic paint down, it's going to lift that off and give me a really nice cool print. So I'm starting out with a base of white acrylic paint there. I'm using the Liquitex Basic paints, and I'll try and give you the colors as we move across, but this is titanium white that I have down. These are student grade paints. The color that I'm using there is the yellow oxide, and I'm using a die cut. I don't even know who makes these die cuts, but they're just background die cuts. Use what you have in your stash. And I'm just going to add some patterns. Now, if you don't want to watch me do the monoprinting on this process, skip through because this video is quite long. I'll tell you it's 30 minutes long. You don't have to watch me do this. I encourage you to make yours unique in your own. The one tip I will give you before you move forward is if you are going to do this process on linen or material, you do want your paint quite thick, and you do want to use acrylic paint, not water-based paint, because you don't want it to bleed out later on. So acrylic paint, and you want it to be quite liberal with the paint. So if you want to move forward and do your own style monoprinting, go right ahead. I'm using my color palette today is going to be turquoise, magenta, yellow oxide, and white. I'm sticking with those, basically those colors. And they turn out just absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to just liberally add these all over. You saw me draw a line across the top of my monopress. I did it very lightly because I don't want to damage my Gelli plate. And I'm pretty much adding splotches of paint with a cosmetic sponge. And then I'm just kind of blending it in with my finger. I'm being very careful with that yellow because I don't want the yellow to create mud. Here, this is actually some white paint that I've added a little bit of retarder to so that it becomes quite fluid. And I keep it in a Wilton cake decorating container with the lid on top. And I use it all the time. I don't water it down with water because acrylic paint, if you add too much water, the pigment will separate. So the white line at the top was just to let me know where my linen or my piece of fabric was going to end. There was no point in me covering the entire press with paint because my fabric wasn't going to go that far. So as you can see, this is why you want to add a lot of paint, because the paint does dry rather quickly, and the fabric soaks up a lot of paint. So you want to make sure you're quite liberal with the paint. Again, I'm just going to go back and add some more paint to my press, and this time I'm going to just kind of blotch around where I've already pulled the pattern. I'm just going to add splotches of paint on my press and then pick up patterns where the fabric is missing pattern, if that makes sense. So where there's void of pattern, I'm going to try and fill them in. Now I started in the center of my fabric because those ends are going to end up on the inside. So I want to get my best pull in the center. Ooh, that was lightning, if you heard that in the video. It's raining here. So I'm just going to keep going and keep filling in here and there until I get the pattern that I want. So I don't really know what else to add, but just play, go in and have a lot of fun with your jelly presses. This is one of my favorite tools to play with, especially when I just want to get into my studio and play and have a lot of fun. You don't really have to give a lot of thought to this. You just play and come up with some really great patterns. And one of the things I really like about this is anything goes. If you want to scribble on this thing with the back end of a pen, you can. You know, anything goes. You can stamp on it. You can ink it up. You can do anything you want to do to it. Anything goes. Just be really careful that you don't create mud with your color choices. So I recommend you limit your color palette so that you're using colors that complement each other and they don't end up, you know, doing too much damage with your you know, you just don't want to create browns and yucky colors, unless of course that's what you're after. So this is the part that I love. I'm going to take a piece of paper now and clean off my jelly plate because my fabric is where I want it to be. And look at this luscious goodness. This is an amazing background that will get used again in future. So yeah, it's amazing. And even the ghost print that I pull is going to be amazing. So I cannot wait to pull this out. And I think I might make a card for this on this. I mean, the only way you could achieve this kind of texture is from monoprinting. I'm a firm believer of that. Look at this. Ugh, just amazing. So cut down into smaller doses. This is going to make an amazing background for a card, a masculine card, or a tag or something. I don't know. So yeah, I just believe you couldn't do that if you tried, if you wanted to try. So now if you want to clean your jelly plate, I probably would have left that alone, and future Tonya probably will, but just pull out a baby wipe and wipe it clean. So now moving on to the subject of my little book here is a heart. So I'm just going to take this muslin and snip the edges roughly about 3.5 inches square, and I just rip it. That's the best part of it. And this is unbleached muslin. I buy it by the yards usually because it's really inexpensive, and I have stashes of it here in my scrap room. When I go to fabric stores and they have it, sometimes remnants on a roll, I always buy it because I use a lot of it. Folding it in half because it's square basically, just make yourself a little fat heart, and that's pretty much what I did, is just fold it and trim it into a heart like we used to make those paper hearts in elementary school. Just I was having a little brain hiccup or something because I couldn't cut out a heart for some reason, I don't know, but anyway, so the paper was sliding because I have tortured my Timmy scissors to death, and they probably shouldn't be cutting fabric. But anyway, if you cut it 3.5 inches, it should fit the cover of this style book, and it also was enough to fit my sentiment. So I was very happy. Now, the sentiment says, when life gives you more than you can stand, kneel. And I believe that. I always believe that you should pray a lot, often. And the reason I decided, I'm covering this, by the way, this with the Dina Weekly Ranger Turquoise I love this paint, by the way. This is probably one of my all-time favorite paints. Is one, the color is delicious, but two, the paint is covers amazing. And then I'm going to use some of that white to just add a few highlights to the heart. But while I'm working on this, I just want to say that this sentiment prompted me to make this journal because I'm constantly saying, "Sure, I'll pray for you," and then I forget, or I say a quick little prayer and then I immediately forget, or I don't follow up, or whatever the case may be. So I thought I would make this little journal to sit next to my computer and for online prayer requests. So when I hear of a buddy online who says, "Hey, will you pray for me?" or, whatever, I thought I would go ahead and write it in my little book. And then when I do my daily devotion, I would pull this little book out and go through the prayer requests that were spoken online that I said, "Yes, I will pray for you," and write them down inside of here and just quickly run through them and include them. And then I'm keeping true to my word. So I'm going to ask my buddies online who ask for those prayer requests if they can also follow through with a praise report at the end, because it's nice when you ask for prayer. If you follow up with a thanks for that prayer, this is also what has happened in light of that prayer. So it's nice to hear feedback back. Thank you for your prayers, because this happened as a result. Anyway, so I've got my sentiment that I've stamped there with a little bit of archival ink, and it will stamp really nicely if you make sure that paint is good and dry. And I make sure that your sentiment is or that your book, when you put it on there, that it's centered. So now I've pulled out that French script, which is my go-to stamp. I absolutely love the stamp. If you don't buy any other stamp from Yvonne Blair, you need this stamp. It's beautiful. But I had to put a little arrow on it so I knew which way the French script was going. So anyway, I'm stamping that all around my book just to give it a little bit of like little hidden texture there in the background, and it's very hard to see, but it's there. And it shows up really nicely inside of all of those white splats and stuff, so it's really cool. And I'm going to put it there on the inside covers of my book as well. And then so this little book is turning into one of my all-time favorites. I'm absolutely loving these colors. That little strip of fabric, I thought I would make like a little cover to close a closure. In the end, I end up throwing it to the side because it didn't need it, and I felt like it'd get in the way. But if you do want to do a closure, do it when, make sure you're doing it all at one time. This was Liquitex ink, and it's gold, and this bottle is just about done for, but just adding it here and there where the yellow oxide is, because I felt like the yellow oxide was a little bit dull, and this is about the same color as the yellow oxide, but it's got a little sparkle in it, and I thought my book needed a little bit of gold glimmery sparkle. So everything needs a little shimmer in it. So when you take your problems to the king, they need to have a little gold in them, right? So anyway, you see me dabbing it up on that little blotter piece there that I end up tossing to the side later. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, so my heart's going to fit perfectly right there in the center of that book. I keep measuring it. Now, I will give you a tip. Before I'm going to go sew, so I'm taking that little grease pencil there, and I'm going to go ahead and do a shadow over where that heart is going to be. And that's really just to mark where the heart needs to be, so that whenever I go sew around the edge, I know where it goes. And then I thought about it, and I was like, that grease pencil is not a permanent. So I went and got my Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Stamper's Big Brush Artist Pen and the Cold Gray 4233, and I went over that spot and then made this wonderful shadow so that whenever I do put my heart down, it will have a really nice shadowed look on it, which is really great for mixed media anyway, and now it's a little more permanent. So then I took some, I didn't do this on camera, but I took some mixed media, matte medium, and I kind of glued, not all the way to the edge because I don't want it in my sewing machine, but I glued it just in the middle. I glued down that heart so it wouldn't slide, and then I let it dry for a really long time. There I go, tossing that to the side. And then I stitched around my heart. And then I stitched around all of the edges of my book. Now, I did not stitch that together. I just stitched it so it wouldn't continue to fray. And then I just decided to glue it onto my book because one thing you need to know, if you want to sew this, fine, go ahead and sew, make a pocket, stick the book inside of it, and do all of that if you want to, so that you have this for future books, but I'm just going to keep it on the one book. But you also, when you start to glue this down, you want to make sure you leave it kind of loose in the spine so that it can open freely. Just don't glue it super tight. In fact, I left mine kind of really loose in the spine area. A little, like, you'll see me put my finger down to make sure that it stays kind of loose right at the spine. The fabric does shrink just a little bit when you add paint to it, so yeah, you want to make sure you leave just a little bit of hangover so that it has enough room for it to shrink as it dries. Again, I didn't make this go all the way to the inside of the spine. Originally, I was going to sew this and make it a pocket to just stick inside the book, but I didn't make it wide enough to do that. So if you want to, measure it appropriately so that you can. I just chose to not do that, and the only reason for the stitching around the outside of the book is so that it doesn't fray uncontrollably for me. Yeah, so now it's time to come back. Everything's dry, everything's good, and I'm going to do a little bit of doodling because as I looked at the book, I felt like it was just a little too plain and it needed to have a little bit of doodling on it, and I felt like it needed a little more white splatters, so I'm going to grab out that white paint again and just put a few little dots there. So I decided that I just wanted to add a few little doodles here and there, and just add a little bit more scribbles, and I just feel like that just adds a little more interest to the cover. So what I did was down there at the bottom, I just added a few dashes, some X's and O's. So every time I added a pattern at the bottom, I added the same pattern up at the top. So those are just little dashes. I know it's hard to see them on the video. And then X's and O's, X's and O's, and then I thought about it and I was like, okay, well, I'll scribble around all of the circles and then add a few little squiggle marks like they're like stitches or whatever around them. That'll give them depth. You know, mixed media style. Just go in there and do some doodling. And then I added some heavier dashes up around the top. And this is just really creative play. Just giving yourself permission to go in there and look at the pattern that you have created with your monoprinting and doodle around some of those patterns. And then I decided to go ahead and do some just writing some things on there, like pray often, writing some things to myself, pray often, seek him, praise him, those kind of things on there. And then I came back in with my artist pen there and created a few more shadows around some of the circles, around some of the hearts, and just adding a little more depth. So when I got away from it, I thought, you know what, it would be nice to write a little note to myself on the inside too, that when you pray, it's not enough to just pray. you also have to believe and have faith that God has got this and He's in control of all things. So Yvonne just released the stamp that says believe. Now, it did not stamp very well, but that is because the acrylic paint is somewhat on different levels. So whenever it was stamping, it was just not an even surface to stamp onto, so the ink just didn't transfer very well. So what I decided to do was just go in and fill in the space with the Stamper's Big Brush Artist Pen, and you know, it worked just as well. You can still see it very good. Also, my archival ink pad has probably seen better days because I am the worst stamper on the planet. I leave it open all the time. I am truly stamping challenged and not the neatest person on the planet when it comes to this stuff. So if I can do this, trust me, you can do this. Anyone can do this, because I'm really challenged when it comes to this. So I decided to use up a little bit more of that ink in that bottle so I can toss it in the trash when we're done with this video. And I added a little bit of that to the inside. And then before I close this book up and transfer all of that luscious ink to the inside flap, I decided to go ahead and heat set it. So I did the same thing on the back. You did not need to see that in video. And then here's where my epic fail happens. I did not test the stamp before I stamped it, and I stamped it upside down. And this particular stamp, it says never stop looking up, and it's upside down. So this is how you fix it. You just take your acrylic paint and you paint right over it. And yeah, so I recommend that if you're going to do something like this, stamp it off on something else to make sure you have it mounted onto the acrylic block going in the right direction. But in the end, I actually like the pattern that's on this heart a little bit better, if that makes sense. The heart shape that was there was actually caused, I don't know if you remember, way back in the monoprinting, whenever I splattered the paint around from that little liquid bottle, it formed a heart. So I decided to actually turn that into a heart. Since I have a heart on the front cover, I decided to run with it and keep it on the back. You guys did not see me decorate the back because I felt like this video was getting long enough and painful enough for you guys. So yeah, anyway, so on the back I just repeated the same words that are on the front, and it says pray daily, praise Him, seek Him, and thank Him. And then when I found this stamp, this is a new stamp release from Yvonne, it says never stop looking up. I decided it would look great on the inside of this heart, just repeating that same pattern that's on the cover. I just didn't want to cut another one since it was already glued down. I couldn't sew it anyway. So using that shape that naturally formed, I decided to paint it instead and stamp the image on the inside. Now you do want to make sure that acrylic paint is good and dry before you stamp, and you do want to make sure your stamp is going in the right direction. So you see me doing that. And then repeating the same process so it matches what's on the cover. I'm just adding the shadow there with the Stamper's Big Brush Artist Pen. And then I went ahead and added a few squiggly lines there with my Uniball. Now the pen that I'm using to do all of this is my all-time favorite mixed media pen. It does dry permanent, and it's Uniball Impact 207. And it's a little wider gauge. And I love it, love it, love it. It's my go-to pen for mixed media. Now this is another one of those die cut backgrounds. I use it all the time, and I just mixed a little bit of that yellow oxide paint with some white paint and used it as a stencil. I love it. Love how that turns out, and in the end I'm absolutely happy with this. So then I decided that since my friends on Facebook are going to help me out with my quest of keeping up with their prayer requests, and they're going to give me a praise report. And I might just private message them and ask them for a little praise report if I put them on my prayer requests, prayer list. Anyway, I decided to break this book in half and create a praise report section so that once I go to prayer and I ask God to help them out with their little praise or their little prayers, that I thought I would go back and say, thank you, Lord, for, you know, meeting my prayer requests. So I've decided to go ahead and add a little bit of paint to those edges so that I know that now that section is for praise and saying thank you and giving a thankful heart in that section of my prayer and that part of my day. So yeah, I feel like if you're going to tell somebody you're going to pray for them, then you need to be praying for them. And then if you do pray for them, then you need to go back and you need to say thank you when that prayer request has been met and that prayer has been answered. So anyway, I'm going to do a little hand doodling here and write praise report for this section. And then now, not in camera, I did go back to my washi tapes and add a little bit of washi tape and add a little paper clip to that section. And I did some hand doodling over some of that paint, and I did dress this up just a tiny bit. I wanted to keep it somewhat flat because I do need to write in this book. I might take the paper clip off in the end because it might get in the way, but just wanted to dress that up just a little bit more. But you can see it in the final pictures whenever we get to the end of this video, which is coming up. But for doodling, if you don't feel like you can hand doodle this, you can always turn to your handy dandy stamps. But practice your hand doodling too. I feel like this is a great way to, practice because you have the lines here. This is just a simple little letter, hand lettering. It's block lettering. I'm not saying mine's perfect because it's not, but, just go in there and do a little mixed media. You can use some stamps to dress this up if you want to as well. So this is praise report, and then down at the bottom I'm going to write, with thanksgiving in my heart I come to you, my Lord, so that this is my cover page for the section of the praise report. So anyway, I believe this is the end of my little video here. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me during this long process. Quite winded here. I know it was long. If you did hang out through this entire process with me, thank you so much. Here is the picture of my cover. It's quite vibrant, and all of that yellow is super shiny. It's very glittery, and I just love how this all turned out. It's so beautiful, and it will be so inspiring. So I will have a great place for all those wonderful notes whenever people ask for prayer requests. I'll have a place to document those and then go back to them later on and say, thanks to the Lord for, answering those prayers. And then here's the back cover. Thank you again so much for hanging out with me. If you've enjoyed this production, please make sure you give me a thumbs up and share this with a friend. And don't forget to go check out that blog post where you will see these photographs and get a supply list for this project.